Welcome everyone to this first session at the Global Investigative Journalism Conference. This year, unfortunately, we have to do it online for obvious reasons. This is the first health panel. So today we are going to look into digging into health and medicine. Just to have some basic information, let's say that first of all, as you see, there is a chat. Feel free to put there your questions. We are going to try and address them. We will have today, I am the moderator of this session, and we have two more speakers, which is Catherine Riva and Fabiola Torres, that you see on the screen. And again, we find very important that beside our presentations, we can try and address your questions. Because we are all aware that in these 2 years, actually at warp speed, many journalists and also investigative journalists had to improvise themselves, medical journalists. And we know that this is not exactly straightforward. It's a very complex field. So I will start with a little introduction, and then I will give the floor first to Catherine Riva and then to Fabiola Torres. So I will now share my screen. So first of all, this is Recheck, is the non-profit organization that I co-founded together with Catherine Riva. And basically the panel of today, we will look at two specific topics or areas, because as I said already, it's a very complex field, of course. So we could speak about a number of things, but we will try to keep it compact and focused on some more defined issues. Always in the philosophy of the Global Investigative Journalism Network, we always try to share knowledge and pass it from one fellow to the next. So we are going to try and give you as many as possible concrete tools also to do this. So in today's session, we are going to look at approval and regulation pre-COVID and what is going on today. And then we are going to look, especially with Fabiola, at conflicts of interest, which are extremely important in this field, as they are in many other fields, of course, of investigative journalism, but in the health and medicine field, they are paramount. So as we mentioned already, conflicts of interest, I will start showing you the declaration or disclosure of myself and Catherine Riva that, as I mentioned, co-founded with me Recheck. We do work together. So we don't have direct or indirect pharmaceutical and medical devices companies financing. So we are independent. You can check our website, and we have like many resources, including a secure platform in case you want to leak to us, or you know someone that would like to share something really important in the public interest. Say you don't have such a platform, feel free to direct people to our platform. Is secure, has been developed in collaboration with Global Leaks, which provides such platforms to many non-profit organizations. Recheck is implicated in projects with academics in the States and in Canada. We work paid for the British Medical Journal, and we are on Twitter. These are the three accounts that we use. So just like a quick overview about what we do, we work with the methods, the tools, and the ethics that are really at the intersection between investigative journalism and evidence-based medicine, so-called EBM. They share many things, we believe, but most importantly, they share a hypothesis-driven approach. And I think it rings a bell for every investigative journalist in this room. We know that it's so important in our field that we start from a hypothesis and then we try to prove it, or maybe we find out that it's not the good hypothesis. So that's how we work. So we are really a bit of at the intersection between academics and investigative journalism. What EBM means many things, of course, but in a nutshell means that any course of action has to be based on the available, most up-to-date scientific evidence. And here we come already in a difficult field, because mostly in the last 2 years, whatever has been called actually evidence or science is not exactly the same. And when there is uncertainty,
Nee, ich habe jetzt eine Konferenz.
maybe
Okay,
someone
alles gut.
needs
Und geht's euch gut?
Ja. Sophie.
Obwohl, vielleicht könnte ich immer so eine geile
Sophie.
bringen.
Thank you. Sorry, everyone. Just this is a good reminder. Let's mute our microphones when there is the session going on. No problem, Sophie, anyway. So about EBM, when there is uncertainty, this needs to be communicated to the patient, and in our case, to the public. And this is very important, again, thinking about this last 2 years, because rather often public health authorities, but also journalists, said it's like this. It's more complicated than that. And then EBM is a lot about what we know, but also about what we don't know. And it's about being very systematical. And here I think, again, there is really the crossroads with investigative journalism. So this is the guide that we have been writing on commission of the Global Investigative Journalism Network, so the organizer of this conference. The guide is available in 7 languages so far, and it's in open access. So we have been writing it and publishing it together in collaboration with GIJN, really with the public interest in mind. It's published with a Creative Commons license, which means that can be reproduced, republished, distributed after having checked in with us and or with GIJN. So the guide has been really conceived a bit like a handbook. You can read it as a whole. You can read it, the whole thing is 90 pages, so watch out. But also you can just jump into a chapter that you feel like you might need maybe for your investigation. So we try to use a layperson language, not too complicated, because we are aware that very often in this field, already the jargon is quite scary because you need to know quite many things. But we are confident that this could be helping you if you wanna or have to work in this field. The weird thing is that we started this project before this whole international crisis began. And I have to be honest with you, when Catherine and I today go and read some of the chapters, is quite shocking because many things have changed now, crazy, in just 2 years. And we will go into that today a little bit. This is a bit like the content. You will see you can check the guide online, or you can download it as a PDF so that you can do what you want with it. Consider it contains about 400 links to resources. So of course, online you can click on them. And then at the end, there is a full listing, like an appendix, with a lot of links as well, like regulatory authorities, where do you find the data, and so on. So these are a bit the take-home messages we tried to put there, because of course then we added like a preface about COVID-19. So some information just to try and help our fellows. So we think these are some very important points, especially, let's say, be cautious about the models, because in these 2 years we have been bombed with these predictions. It's more complicated than that. Models can be interesting, but they depend a lot by the quality of the data you feed into the models. And we have seen a lot of modeling based on poor data. So the results were not really satisfying. And then you need to really stick to the best available evidence. We will see how you do that. And always provide context in your COVID-19 reporting, because basically you need to know what is normal in order to say this is really incredibly exceptional. So you need to know a bit the field of medicine and health and public health. And then please don't fall for the hype. There is a lot of hype around the world since 2 years almost. Beware of that. And beware of media reporting. I'm sorry, I have to say this to an audience of journalists, but we have seen a lot of not good information published on the media in these 2 years. There is also on GIJN.org this article that a GIJN contributor put together out of the guide, where you find more tips, like trying to break down what you might need to investigate in this field. And we have in chapter 1, actually, we have a whole chapter about dig deeper into development and approval, which is what we are going to hear now from Catherine Riva. She will explain us a bit better how is it that, because I mean, the goal of these 2 sessions is to have a look, how do you investigate a health system? How do you dig deeper in the system? So the very basic, again, is that you need to know how it works normally. So in this chapter, you find a bit how the system works when a new drug or a new vaccine comes to the market. How does it happen? Which are the stages? So I'm now giving the floor to Catherine Riva. Please, yes. Catherine, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Serena. So yes, it's very important to see that approval is a fundamental procedure because it's here not just to run a bureaucracy, it's here to protect the public and to protect the patient, to protect them against drug or vaccine or device that might be causing harm, that might be not necessary. And that's why the regulators built a framework that here you can see the breakdown in several phases, how it happens, in order to bring the best knowledge, the best evidence they could have, and so they can say at the end, okay, we can say we have a ratio between benefit and harms that should be favorable for the patients and for the public. As you can see immediately, you have attention in this framework because from the point of view of the pharmaceutical company who tries to bring a new product on the market, you can see from the very beginning they are running out of time. They have a patent of the product just for 20 years. And if the approval goes the classical way, until the product gets approved, they have to wait for 10 years. They have to run trials, they have to do a lot of things. And each phase is very important because each phase is here to build a specific knowledge on a specific aspect of the efficacy or of the safety of the product. So we were told that when COVID began, we were told these 10 years procedures, we will be able to squeeze it in just a couple of months. And at the end, we will have solid data allowing us to make a solid approval decision, valid, that can be in the best interest of the public. What's interesting as well is the fact that what was considered as a little bit conflicting perspective, you know, the perspective of the public safety and the perspective of the financial gain, financial benefit that the pharmaceutical is pursuing, they were not conflicting anymore. We were all in the same boat, all together in it. And now the interest of the pharmaceutical industry is the same interest as the public has. That's a very doubtful conclusion. Serena, you can go to the next slide. What's interesting is that there has always been pressure in order to speed up this procedure, this approval. So the first concept we had in order to do that, it was called fast track. It was invented in the 90s with a noble purpose to quickly bring new treatments to patients that would address unmet needs. But very soon it became a shortcut for pharmaceutical companies, allowing them to skip or shorten in-depth assessment by regulators. And what we saw coming with COVID, with this emergency use approval, it's a kind of super accelerated approval, because the fast track ran approximately 4 or 5 years. And now we are we are approving vaccine, of course, with string attached, but even though at warp speed, as said Serena, in just a couple of months, we have a product on the market. Another phenomena we have seen, as it shows to the next slide, is what we call with Serena science and regulation by press release. So in November 2020, Pfizer released a lot of press release claiming that his COVID-19 vaccine has shown a 90% efficacy, which is very high. And everybody was very hopeful, was celebrating this thing. The main problem was we didn't have any published data on it. We didn't have any data on preprint server, as it become usual in this crisis. We had just nothing. We just have Pfizer's and BioNTech word, and we were told we should believe them. And that's from a scientific or evidence-based perspective. It should really ring alarm. It's not enough to base conclusion and to make public health decision based on the communication of a pharmaceutical company. So at the same time, there were the Data Leads conference, I think, organized as well by the Global Investigative Journalism Network. And we tried to shed a little bit light in this communication. And we underscore a couple of things. The first is it's not enough to just look after the press release. You really have to go and take a look at the protocol, meaning the framework the pharmaceutical and the regulators agreed on to test the vaccine. And there it was obvious that the protocol didn't address the really relevant questions. It was the first thing. And the second was the claimed efficacy of 90% and the claimed safety. They were based just on analysis of a very tiny portion of all the participants. And that's not enough as well. You need all the data in order to really make a claim on a benefit-harms ratio of a new products coming in such a strange condition to the market. So now we are 1 year later. Where are we now? You can go to the next slide. We see that there is some effectiveness issue. Efficacy is what you measure in the clinical trials, and effectiveness is when you run in the real world with your vaccine. The effect is called effectiveness. So we have an effectiveness issues with the mRNA vaccine. They seem to have the same problem as the annual flu shots. It means that the effectiveness drops and immunity vanishes after a couple of months. So it's not looking so good as we were told 1 year ago. That's the first issue we have with this. So what does it teach us? Randomized controlled trials are a fantastic tools, but they must be designed to answer relevant questions. Otherwise, they are meaningless. It's just not the money and the time worth to running them. And what are the relevant questions in the case of COVID? A vaccine, the trial should show if the vaccine is able to reduce the likelihood you will get severely ill, or you will go to the hospital, or you will die. And since we are told it's a pandemic situation, it's very important to see has the vaccine the ability to prevent infection and interrupt disease transmission. Obviously, none of them were among the trial's endpoints. What were called a COVID-19 disease was the person has a SARS-CoV-2 positive test and at least one symptom: cough, chills, fever, loss of testosterone. So what you would describe rather as a mild case. It shows as well that the second lesson to be learned is that the trial should be conducted in a proper time frame. It's not enough to bring analysis of what is happening after 7 days after second dose or after 14 days after second dose. Obviously, you need a much longer follow-up in order to see how the vaccine will come with effectiveness, with the benefit-harms ratio, and so on. You can go to the next slide. Those data here, 6 months safety and efficacy of the vaccine, are Pfizer-BioNTech data. What they show is that we had an efficacy peak, and they say 96.2%, but after 4 months, it starts to drop. And on average, the efficacy decline vaccine of 66% every 2 months. So times matter, the duration of the trials matters absolutely. On the next slide, we can see as well, we have another problem, and that shows that emergency use approvals, super accelerated approvals might be a bad idea, is since the very moment the vaccine gets this AUA, we don't have any control group anymore, because since the vaccine is on the market, you should, yes, or you could, but they decide they should vaccine the people who receive the placebo. They say it's unethical to restrain them from acceding to the vaccine. So we don't have any control group anymore. We just have now a simple monitoring of the participants in the trial, and that's a very pity, because we lost the best tool we could have on this. So it means emergency use approvals, you will run a trial only a couple of months and then it's finished. So that's an issue. And on the next slide as well, what we show now with this dropping of efficacy, we saw the idea of a booster shots coming into the conversation. What was remarkable was the fact that the US government announces boosters in the beginning of September 2020, but before the FDA have seen any data. So now we are really, you have the government deciding what the regulators should decide. It put them under such a pressure, it's impossible to do an independent work when you are working in such conditions, under so much time pressure and so much political pressure. So we really have a dilution of the protection that approvals are supposed to be from, and that should worry all of us, because once you open that door, as we did for the COVID-19 vaccine, it's become very, very difficult to say to other pharmaceutical company, no, your products, we should approve it in a regular way around 10 years. It's become very difficult to justify it. And unfortunately, 1 year passed since we had the first announcement about the so-called efficacy of the vaccine, and we tremendously lack critical reporting on it, just to confront and to ask for more data before we start to run massive campaigns. And now we are in the situation where probably the people will have to get another booster. So that was for my part on approval, and I give the floor to Serena back.
Thank you, Catherine. So just to finish this part on our side, there was an event that was incredibly almost ignored by most media worldwide, and that's quite interesting because it was an important event. So just when the US government announced that we would start giving boosters to people, there were two very important people at the Food and Drug Administration. You need to keep in mind that the American FDA, it's very important for regulation worldwide, because we know that decisions made by the FDA are going to be taken and applied by all the other regulators. So in a way, they are the most important regulatory authority worldwide, also because they have a lot of resources that many others don't have. So on the 1st of September 2021, so we are just a few months ago, the director and deputy director of a very important office for vaccines at the FDA quit. And many didn't realize how important was that. Although, of course, people like medical investigative journalists and scientists that are active in public health, I mean, we were all shocked, frankly, because this happened because the tension over boosters, because the US government, the Biden administration, took a decision, as Catherine said, before the FDA had seen any data on boosters. And that's very concerning. I mean, there is a reason why we have regulators, we have standards. I mean, there is a reason why. However, everything has changed. So this happened, and shortly after, they published this piece on The Lancet. You can consider it maybe passive-aggressive reaction, because, I mean, first they quit with a nice official letter saying, oh, okay, we're sorry, we gotta quit. And then in this piece that you find in open access on The Lancet, they explain why. Their considerations on the lack of evidence in order to recommend boosters to be given to the world population, as it is happening now in the wealthy countries. So this is also something else that just happened, actually. This is an article published a few days ago on The Guardian. In the article, you find the links to the sources, which is actually a study that was recently published. And here we have another problem, and it's again in the field of what Catherine was saying. There is a reason why we need well-designed studies, and there is a reason why it's not a good idea to rely on the press releases of the companies, because, I mean, they have an agenda, of course. So this article, it's like featuring interesting facts, actually. So these researchers from a number of institutions, and they are like, you know, public, solid institutions, they've been exploring what happens in households. Is there a difference between transmission dynamics between vaccinated and unvaccinated individual? Because as we said, this is so important, right? We want to have a vaccine that inhibit transmissions. Otherwise, why we need it? And the results were really a bit shocking, probably for some, not for everyone, because if you had looked already at the study, you could have worried about that, because the results suggest that even those who are fully vaccinated, so 2 doses with most vaccines, have a sizable risk of becoming infected, with analysis revealing that a fully vaccinated contact has a 25% chance of catching the virus at home, while an unvaccinated contact has a 38% chance of becoming infected. So you don't need a PhD in mathematics to see that the difference, it's actually not that big. And this is a problem because, I mean, many, for instance, let's say COVID passes, green passes, restrictions are based on the very idea that if you are vaccinated, you are not going to transmit, right? It doesn't seem to work that way. We recommend you to read this article, and we promise you can do it also if you're not like super skilled in evidence-based medicine. This is a piece recently published on the BMJ, so the British Medical Journal, Evidence-Based Medicine Journal. It's about the COVID-19 vaccine trials, and it's about transparency, because it's a matter of fact, we lack transparency. This is probably not, again, it's not a breaking news. In many fields, we don't have full transparency, and that's a lot what investigative journalism is about, reclaiming transparency, fighting for transparency. And here, we really recommend you to read this really well-sourced article that is not super difficult to read, because you will see that we don't have enough data to assess what is going on with these biologics. This is another really good resource that we really recommend you to check out. is a non-profit project. It's called the Riot, Restoring Invisible and Abandoned Trials. And they are keeping like track of all the available documents about those trials, because you have to keep in mind, and the guide contains a lot about this, that the data we obtain in trials, it's a higher quality than what you can collect in real life. Because in real life, you have a lot of confounding factors. We have seen many times in these 2 years. Data sometimes are not really good quality. So you have a lot of noise, background noise. Whereas when you study in a clinical trial, you have rules of the game. So it's very important that we, as a community, like medical investigative journalists, medical community, scientists, public health specialists, that we do have access to the whole amount of data from the clinical trials, and that is not the case. However, in the website of Riot, you will find all we have. So it's worth really checking it out. And then this is the chapter of the guide about conflicts of interests, which will be the main topic of the next presentation with Fabiola Torres. It's very important that investigative journalists in this field keep always in mind the conflict of interest issue, because it's extremely important. And it's not only that story, that the old traditional story, that doctor has been bribed. It's more complex than that. Especially we know, because in the guide we try to explain also a bit the science behind the conflicts of interest, of the influence. We are all influenced. As a journalist, you know very well, because sometimes we fall for a hypothesis, we love it, and then we lose contact with what we need to keep a clear mind, right? Or we know, for instance, that we can't report about something that, let's say, my husband is part of that story and they do investigate. It just doesn't work. Conflicts of interest are very complex. In the guide, you find a lot. You find also a lot of troubleshooting tips, techniques you can use, because conflicts of interest are not only financial. There is a lot around that. So we will dive a bit into this very important topic with this next presentation with Fabiola Torres. And I give you now the floor, Fabiola.
Thank you, Serena. It was an amazing presentation. It's a big pleasure to join this panel. I will share my screen. Okay. Yes, Serena talked. I will focus on two parts of the guide that were for my team very important last year and this year to follow or to cover the pandemic. How to identify the red flags, because you all the time are reading many papers. Sometimes it's difficult to understand and report on medical research and try to identify which is information with good quality or not. And the other part is how we expose the industry interference and conflict of interest before and during COVID-19. Salud con Lupa is the digital media organization dedicated to investigate public health journalism fact-checking in Peru. We are based in Peru, but during the pandemic in 2020, Salud con Lupa was on the radar of many medias and magazines and people in Latin America because of our reporting. We joined GIJN in 2020. We work as a collaborative project with the Poynter Institute to design a tool to help journalists and science work together to analyze scientific evidence and health data. That's why today I will present a tool that is very useful for reporters that wants to follow the evidence, the treatment, the COVID treatment in the world, how we check and how we have the possibility to separate the good sources from the other ones that just are noise. Well, this is the picture that maybe not just medical or scientists face. Also journalists, also science journalists, investigative journalists that are covering the pandemic. We have a lot of information. I just have some data about the information. The Biomedical Library, PubMed, lists more than 74,000 COVID-related scientific papers, more than twice as many as there are about polio, measles, cholera, dengue, and other diseases that have plagued humanity for centuries. But what is the problem? The problem is the quality, as many of the reporters say, and Serena and Catherine explained. Most of the clinical trials or the papers were bad science. This is the problem. Today, we identify travel in the scientific literature that were very complex in this part of the continent because the governments and authorities approve many decisions based on bad papers or bad science. The case of ivermectin, maybe in Latin America, is very popular, but I noticed that also in other countries, Pakistan and others countries before, during 2020, it was a popular drug that was called like a micro drug. Now we know that a third of 26 major trials of the drug were fake, have serious errors or signs of potential fraud. The problem is that many governments spend a lot of money distributing this drug. Nobody says anything. Maybe it will be a chapter in the future on how the governments and how authorities took decisions based on what, or influence or what. Because in my country, as you see, and in other countries, Central American countries also, the government authorities distribute the kit COVID with azithromycin and ivermectin, and it was millions of dollars. Now we know that these studies are not good. They have many errors. And also I published the last retracted, and we are not reporting about the retractions. And this is very important because ivermectin have a lot of spotlight, lot of articles, but not everybody now is talking about the retractions. Here is how my country, I live in Lima, Peru, spent in ivermectin. We import a lot of this drug. Of course, you can see the companies and enterprise that import the drug, but it was not just in my country. I saw on Bloomberg how many companies in India and Brazil also were the winners of this drug. Even this ivermectin drug was not recommended, or some of the scientific community tried to put red flags about it. It was, yeah, I think it was just a voice. Okay. And there was another problem because now we have like a big market that are exploiting new technologies to cash in on pseudoscience. And of course, this is not a new phenomenon of COVID-19. It was before COVID, but now we have a lot of particularly strategies try to buy something because everybody is paying attention how to deal with the illness, how to deal with the issues. I have two examples. Tafix, like the nasal spray that was sold in Spain, alert it, but when the companies that import this product went to Latin America, they sold it trying to sell by influencers or doctors on TV recommending this in order not to use the mask. And it was a scandal, of course. We report all the conflicts of this product. Even the agency in Spain alerted it. This product was imported to Latin America, and we identify it as social media network all the time by viralize this kind of products. And the other is the mask with cover. This is something that at the beginning of the pandemic, I think many models of masks were sold, but this mask with copper was like the most expensive. And now we know that all the properties that the manufacturer have there are not true, but many people trust on it and spend money. We try to deal with this all the day, every day. We try to identify which is important, which is relevant, which medical study is newsworthy and true. And we have some basic questions that we have to do every day. I will say that the most important is, does the study findings matter to readers right now? And if so, how? But of course, we try to understand the big picture. No? How does this study fit into the big picture? How does it compare to other studies or the same issue? On the same issue, is that really new? Because our mail exploded by press release all the time, but not all the things are true and not all the things are new. Who sponsored it? This is a very important question for all the papers. Also, you read in other magazines, science magazines, scientific magazines. How does it add to previous research? If you are following something, maybe you can compare or interview an expert talking about the report or the new paper. What is the clinical relevance, if any, of the study? How will this change a doctor's practice or the way a reader might choose to behave? This is very important because in order to have spotlights all the time or many news for the COVID, sometimes journalists forget how important it is to explain this and what is the impact for the readers when we publish something without evidence, and how to avoid misinformation in healthcare reporting. We also have some questions that we suggest also to do when you are reporting something. Maybe you have a community, a network of experts that you trust and they don't have conflict of interest, and you can ask, does the paper of the new study confirm what was already understood? Does it clarify an aspect not previously understood? Does it contradict past findings? How much? Does it contradict some but support others? Basically, we try to identify, this is like a quiz when you read something and not to just get the press release and say this is something new to publish. Well, how we determine if medical research is newsworthy? I think the most important question is to consider in covering how it will affect readers' life right now. And not everybody is thinking about it, but all we publish have positive and negative possibilities to the public. Maybe they change their behavior, they change their decisions, and that's something that we have to say every day. What would you select to cover? Another advice for evaluating the methodology of medical reports. Of course, we are not experts in a specific field, but we are experts in finding the faults, who are the smartest, the most critical, skeptical, knowledgeable, and wise in the field. We can ask them about the methodology of a study, ask experts what the study done appropriately, or have any red flags, alternative explanation for findings, the biggest limitations. We have to be very critical with the scientifics also, because we are not familiar with all the information they have, but we have to do the good questions that we must ask to others if this study is a good source or not. And the other part that was important also, very complicated thing that we faced during the pandemic, was the exposing and the industry interference and conflict of interest before and during COVID. You can see this during the pandemic, in the first months of the pandemic, many companies are exploding or explode the COVID pandemic, pretending they are marketing through digital social media and as a humanitarian, and their products build immunity. For example, the milk for babies. These are part of social network strategies or marketing. And now we know that it's important that mothers give milk to the babies because they transmit the immunity, or there is no risk. But during the first year of the pandemic, we didn't know this, and they sold the product like the best alternative for the babies. We don't know a lot about the interests of doctors, scientists, and academics on whose advice the governments relies to manage the pandemic. Not everybody, there is a lack of transparency published. Who is the advice consultants, who join the group of experts that are giving information to the government. In my country, in Peru, we know we cover the vacuna gate. What's the biggest problem in this? That the conflict of interest and the vaccine decisions have a lot of conflicts involved, like, well, normal. The president of the country, the scientists that conducted the clinical trial, ministers, doctors, politicians, everybody were involved in this with the Sinopharm laboratory for the vaccine. And now, after 6 months of this case, we have like a victory of relation of power, because scientists are not separated from the political decision, or they are not just in one part of the story. They were involved with all the political decisions that we have. That's why I believe Serena talked that this is complicated, because we are not familiar with the big players when there is an emergency, and how they are connected with people with power, economic factors, political factors. And this case, I invite you to explore the investigation that we have, and we also map all the relations to investigate chapter by chapter what happened. And this case is like the biggest scandal of conflict of interest and the bioethical practices in the war, I think, because you will see all the soap opera, if we say in our country, that involve, and many of the principal people that were involved now are publishing books telling their own stories. And this is very interesting for journalists now, because they explain details that give more information about it. And well, of course, this has happened because the deep conflicts of interest involved were normal and acceptable. It was the biggest problem. When you don't see that this is a problem, you are in red flags. And what happened with this, I just want to mention to finalize my presentation. We investigate many of the problems around Acuna Gate, but something that I suggest is to follow in the donation and the contracts during the pandemic, because you have big surprises. We identify that Sinopharm import many donations for our country during the process of contracts. We know that this was like a way to give a corruption relation with not with money in this case, with equipment, with diplomatic doses of vaccines. Finally, since September 2020, we launched Scientifically Proven. And what is it? This is a tool that follows the analysis of the most important or talk about COVID treatments. And every Friday, we update information about all the treatments, about how the evolution, how the evidence show about any of them. We have a categorization of levels. We work with Epistemonical Foundation with a researcher that is a special researcher for medicines based on evidence. We try to organize it in this kind of cards. And we explain what's happening with aspirin, favipiravir, hydroxychloroquine, or all the treatments that in many parts of the world are studied or have clinical trials. And we want to know what happened of it, because we have vaccines now, but we also have some investigations about the studies. And it's important because now we, as I told at the beginning of this presentation, for example, ivermectin was like neutral at the beginning of the pandemic or during this year. But now we know that most of the trials have errors and are retracted. And we also report the retractions. And it is important to follow. And we have an English version and also a Portuguese version and a Spanish version. And this is update all week, all Friday. And well, this is like a card that you will see, remdesivir, what is relevant for COVID, what does the evidence say, the main studies. We have to follow, and we have like a readiness score. All of this is well explained in our website. Well, thanks. I think that if you have questions, you will do. Thanks, Serena and Catherine.
So thank you so much, Fabiola. And I think it's always good to get inspired, right? This is a bit also always the goal of coming together under the GIJN big family. Because I think, for instance, the Vacuna Gate of Salud con Lupa, I bet that if you get inspired from their project and try to apply it to your country, you might find out interesting things. So in the chat, you see the website of Salud con Lupa. So we have actually just 2 questions at the moment. We just have a few minutes left. We should be finishing in 1 minute, but we have like a little time left. So I'm going to pick up the 2 questions we had. Chrissy was asking, so under 138 participants to a study, is this a small sample? And she was also mentioning that there was some criticism of the Sputnik, which is the COVID-19 Russian vaccine, relating to the unblinding issue or the quality of the studies or the material available from those studies. And then she was, I think quite rightly, asking like, well, but then also the others have been doing the same or not. So I would like to ask Catherine, would you like to address quickly this question of Chrissy, especially
Yes.
like, is this a small sample? What about
so it was, I think Chris's comment was about the study about the transmission under vaccinated, unvaccinated, and so on. So I completely agree with Chrissy. It's a very small sample, 138 people. I just would like to make you aware, because I just checked, when the press release by Pfizer came out, the tiny portions of the participants that were analyzed for who we had the data, it was just 170 participants, the data of 170 participants that were analyzed. And this was judged by all the media completely enough to say, yes, now we have a tremendous vaccine and we should really go for it. And so, and there was very few critical comment on it. So I think it's, you're right, it's important to be critical about the quality of a study, to mention its limitation, but you just have to do it in the same way for every part of the arguments we have in the conversation about the vaccine campaign, and I think everybody was very excited when those vaccines came out. Everybody gets very enthusiastic, and of course, it's you might be. And that's the bias we have. If you were enthusiastic, you will be more reluctant to deal with the criticism and with the limits of the products. And I think I completely accept your criticism, but it's a very small studies, and of course there are a lot of limitations. But the base on what we decided, okay, the country decided, okay, now we go for the Pfizer or for the Moderna vaccine. We didn't have much more data, but the consequences of it were absolutely tremendous. So yes, I think.
Thank you, Catherine. Maybe one thing we can add, of course, sample size numbers are always very important, of course. But one thing that you might want to use the guide, the GIJN Health Guide for, is exactly to get yourself a bit maybe up to speed with the methodology. Because this is very often is actually more important than the sample size. Because we have in the guide, you find also some illustrations, because sometimes you need a visual. And there is a way to, as Fabiola was mentioning, spot some red flags in the design, so-called design of a study. This is super important, because the big family of the medical science studies is really big. In the guide, you find like a big picture of all of them listed, and they are all very different one from the next, which means that they are certain study designs, as they are called, which are really good to answer a question. And there are others that are good to answer another kind of question. But when it goes, for instance, about assessing a drug or a vaccine, safety, efficacy, or effectiveness in real world, well, we do have some gold standard. This doesn't mean that if you get the right design, you are sure of the result, because, I mean, unfortunately, there is always the possibility to tweak. I mean, statistics, we have put also this quote in the guide, can help you actually get whatever you want out of the bag. So you have to be very aware of the red flags. But I believe that we believe at Recheck that the most important thing is that you know the basics. You have to get a bit really familiar with the methodology, because this lets you also be able to assess, because sometimes 170 can be a good number and sometimes can be a very insufficient number. However, there was another question from Uliana, which is a question that I have to say I heard before in similar events. The question goes around, aren't you afraid, if I'm like rephrasing, if you work in this line, that some people could exploit this conversation, for instance, we're having today. She mentions explicitly right-wing people, people being, generally speaking, against vaccines, that they could be using this kind of approach we have in medical investigative journalism based on evidence-based medicine for their own agenda. So I would like to say a couple of things, and then I would like also to hear from Fabiola. First of all, I want to say honestly, I don't think it's, I mean, I think our role as a medical investigative journalist is to dig deeper and publish in the public interest. The truth is not always nice. You know, sometimes the truth can be also nasty. I don't believe that hiding the truth helps the conversation. Fabiola, in her presentation, which I liked a lot, by the way, she underlined that could be exacerbating misinformation crisis. I share that point, because I think that actually we have another role. Our role is not to hide the truth. Our role is the other way around, is to expose the truth, whatever it is. And I also believe that we can help actually public health authorities and the regulators and even the companies, because they must be held accountable. So it's not our role to play the game just in case someone could use my investigation to say something else. That's not the point, I think. And I believe skepticism is fed by the confusion and the lack of transparency. So maybe it's the other way around, but that's a personal opinion, or also a bit my experience in this field, a bit long. I believe into the right of knowing the truth, because otherwise there is no informed consent and there is no democracy at the end of the day. But Fabiola, what do you think? Because I think it's a very important topic, what Uliana, thank you Uliana, gave us this question.
Yes, Serena, it's complex, but I think that as journalists, we have to fight for transparency and to try to tell people what's happening, even if these kind of groups that against vaccines always exist, and you can see all the days, every day, that they will have a conspiracy theory, but you don't have to follow this agenda. You just have to report all that you prove, or you have enough evidence to report. I think that when we try to do a new discourse or a new way to cover, maybe you contribute to the misinformation all the time. This is something that we have to take care, because maybe you are not working for the pharmaceutical industry, or you are not the authority to say something to just people have to understand what are the rules of this. you are journalists, and if you have evidence, enough evidence to publish something, you have to publish. How the people understand it, you have to be worried about how well explained is your report, but first, transparency.
Thank you. That's very important, I believe. So we have a couple more questions. I wanted maybe to ask Catherine and then also Fabiola. Jenny Henderson, apart from medical journals and press releases, is there anywhere else we should be looking for information on conflicts of interest or flows in the process of approving drugs? It's a complex question, but maybe Catherine, you want to try and answer, and then we give the floor also to Fabiola.
I think on the if you are new in the field, a possibility is to use the publications of the International Independent Drug Bulletin, ISDB. You have one in Germany, Arznei-Telegramm, you have Prescrire in France, you have several. So they are not first-line journals, but they are journals that comment and put into perspective approval, some regulatory decision, and so on. So it's a good place to start in order to understand what was not good designed in the clinical trials we had to support an approval, what data do we lack, what data are still not published, and so on. So I think that's a good place to start if you are new in the field. You also have in Belgium Minerva that comes in Dutch and in French as well. So in the guide we have the list of this of those publications. On the conflicts of interest, you can have several sources. I think the disclosures in the medical journals are a good start as well. Now in some countries, organizations are running databases. In the US, you have the Sunshine Act, where all the doctors and the scientists most have the conflicts of interest, have disclosed the amounts they get from the pharmaceutical industry. I think in Europe, you have a collective like Corrective that also tried to build something similar. There are discussions in the UK to put something similar as well. So I think it's there you could find some information about undisclosed conflict interest. It's important to make a kind of international research when you do that, because a lot of key opinion leaders in the field of medicine are internationally active. So they might disclose something on the international level, but not on the level of your country. So it's worth to make around a little bit brighter and broader. And and I think the last source you can have a look at is all the registration of the patents, because a lot of researchers are involved in patents applications. So I think you could find some interesting information there as well.
Thanks, Catherine. Fabiola, you want to say also something on this question we got?
Can you repeat the question, because I have some comments about the sources or how?
Well, this is, the question was like, apart from medical journals and press releases that we have seen, we should take them with a pinch of salt, to put it mildly. Is there anywhere else we should be looking for information on conflict of interest or about flows in the process of approving drugs?
Okay, well, I will explain what we do, because not all the researchers or scientific or medical community explain or have good practice with transparency and do the disclosure of the conflict of interest. We ask, and we also try to search in their LinkedIn or try to do like a profile of who is who, because sometimes you don't see this reported when they publish something, or when you interview someone, and you don't know that have a relationship with someone who is sponsoring the study or not. The other thing that I would recommend is that when we try to do some, for example, we are talking about vaccines, or when we are talking about treatment, try to identify someone who is not involved in the investigation, knows the field, knows the topic, but are like an independent expert from the universities or centers that are following this kind of field. In Latin America, in Hispanic, we have some networks, and of course the organizations, the scientific journalist organization have like a network that will be useful. This is something that we do, but you have to do your own investigation to identify the conflict of interest. I think that there is no database just to identify it.
Yeah, thank you, Fabiola. So this is a very important tip in our experience as well, that every time, because journalists, we rely heavily on experts' opinion. And in these 2 years, it was really getting a bit crazy because some experts became really VIP. But what we know from working in this field, as Fabiola just said, you really need to do your own homework. So when you're thinking to include maybe an expert opinion or to ask someone to help you, you need to recheck this person's conflicts of interest or connections. In the guide, you also find quite a lot about this, because I mean, there are many keywords you can use when you do your own research. One good source, as Catherine mentioned, is, for instance, the disclosures that are in every study. So every published study nowadays, the authors, they have to say, I am a consultant with this or that company, and so on. Then in our experience, also Congress, conferences, programs are quite interesting, because as Catherine also mentioned before, sometimes they are a bit selective. So maybe they declare here, there, but they don't declare the whole thing. So you can map the background. And then there is a project actually based in the US, but is getting more and more international. I have a conflict of interest with that project because we are part of it, although it's non-for-profit, which is the list of experts, healthcare experts, independent from pharmaceutical companies. Is a project that was launched by Ginny Lancer and Shannon Brownlee, which are two medical investigative journalists. And the project is growing and growing. And I think we are going to speak together with Fabiola, because I think it will be very important to enlarge it. But however, journalists can ask to consult this list that is growing and growing of experts in different fields that are independent. You find the link to that project on our website on recheck.ch. Then I think we just have a few minutes left. I wonder if, Catherine, you feel like addressing this question we got from Chrissy, I think. If the approvals process was sped up too much, which is a matter of fact, I mean, it's not an opinion, are you suggesting more research was needed before vaccines were rolled out? How much more time? And this is like the other part of the question is very speculative, I would say. Would such a delay be acceptable to people when so many were and are still dying? I find very interesting, honestly, the first part of the question, because speculation is always a bit difficult to handle. I think in investigative journalism is even more. But Catherine, how would you address this question from Chrissy?
Yes, I think definitely the approval process was speed up too much. And the problem is it affected also the choice in the design of the trials. Because if you say, okay, we are running out of time, we must have very quickly result, you won't take the hard endpoints, the hard questions would be in the case of COVID, dead of COVID, or need mechanical ventilation in the ICU and so on. You will take what's come first or what's it's easier to get. Namely, it was a COVID positive test and let's say one symptom, even if it's mild, it's okay. Because when you do so, you are building on assumptions and you say, okay, if we don't have mild COVID case, we won't get severe COVID case, for example. It might work, but it might not work. And you can't say at the beginning of the trial if it will be so or not. And I think the problem is as soon as you leave the field of the control trial, where you have monitoring, where you have scientists checking, where you have a proper evaluation, you are doing a huge experimentation in the real world. You are not anymore in a controlled setting. And in the real world, you will have a lot of noise and it will be very difficult to identify, is it a real signal or is it just noise? It's very difficult to make the differentiation when you are in this setting. As long as you are in the randomized control trial, you can control for a lot of variables and you can make claim. As soon as you are in the real world, it's very speculative, it's very difficult. A signal you see might have no importance. So I think, yes, we really need to speak up for well-designed controlled trial, because it's the only, possibly the only setting we have where we really can answer question in a quite definitive way.
Thank you. So about this in the guide, you find a lot. It's really the basic a bit in this field. Now, unfortunately, we have to leave you. I want to thank everyone for being with us today. I know it was a lot to take in, it's quite intense. You have anyway our presentations ready there to download. You can watch them again. You can check our tip sheet and you can get in touch with the three of us. We are online, you easily find us. And you find us, of course, in the platform the conference is using. So thank you everyone for being with us today and see you again. Bye.